Lila Morgan had spent her entire life living up to the expectations of her traditional Southern family. In the small Alabama town of Millhaven, the Morgans were a cornerstone of the community, their family-run restaurant not just a place to eat but a gathering spot where neighbors exchanged stories and celebrated milestones. Lila had been raised in this environment, her future as neatly outlined as the white picket fences that lined the town's streets. She was the perfect daughter, polite, devout, and dutiful, her every action reflecting the values instilled in her since birth. She worked tirelessly at the restaurant, moving seamlessly between the kitchen and the dining room, where she greeted customers with her warm, practiced smile. But beneath the surface, Lila felt a restlessness she couldn't name. Her days were a blur of routines, her dreams quietly tucked away in the corners of her mind. She had always been told that her place was here in Millhaven, helping to carry on the family legacy and one day marrying a respectable man who would uphold the same traditions. Questioning that path wasn't just discouraged, it was unthinkable. That carefully constructed world shifted the day Jade Carter walked through the restaurant's doors. Jade was unlike anyone Millhaven had ever seen, her presence as striking as a thunderstorm on a cloudless day. With her cropped hair, vibrant tattoos that peeked out from beneath her chef's jacket, and a confident swagger that seemed to turn heads wherever she went, Jade was the antithesis of everything Millhaven held dear. She had been hired by Lila's parents to overhaul the restaurant's aging menu, a decision born out of their desire to stay competitive in a world that was beginning to value innovation over tradition. From the moment Lila met Jade in the bustling kitchen, the air seemed to shift. Their first encounter was marked by a brief but charged exchange. Jade, inspecting a stack of ingredients, glanced at Lila with a half-smile that managed to be both teasing and inviting. "So, you're the golden girl around here, huh?" Jade said, her tone light but laced with curiosity. Lila flushed, caught off guard by the comment. "I just help where I'm needed," she replied, her voice soft but steady. Jade's smile deepened. "That sounds like a diplomatic answer. You're not gonna make this easy for me, are you?" Lila wasn't sure how to respond. There was something about Jade that unsettled her, a magnetism that made her feel exposed and intrigued all at once. The days that followed only heightened the tension between them. Jade threw herself into her work with an intensity that both impressed and intimidated Lila. She moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, her hands creating dishes that were as bold and vibrant as she was. The staff quickly warmed to Jade's charm, but Lila kept her distance, unsure of how to navigate the growing pull she felt toward this enigmatic woman. Jade, however, seemed intent on drawing Lila out of her shell. She took every opportunity to challenge Lila, pushing her to step beyond the carefully drawn lines of her life. One evening after the restaurant had closed, Jade found Lila experimenting with a recipe in the kitchen. The sight of Lila, her brow furrowed in concentration as she carefully garnished a plate, caught Jade off guard. "I didn't know you had it in you," Jade said, leaning against the counter. Lila jumped, nearly dropping the spoon in her hand. "I was just trying something," she said, her cheeks flushing. Jade moved closer, inspecting the dish. "You've got an eye for detail," she said, her tone genuine. "Why don't you do this more often?" Lila hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her apron. "It's not really my place," she admitted. "Cooking is. It's just something I like to do when I have time." Jade tilted her head, her gaze piercing. "That's bullshit," she said matter-of-factly. "You're good at this. Don't let anyone tell you it's not your place." Lila stared at her, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, like she was capable of more than the role she'd been assigned. For the first time she allowed herself to wonder if Jade might be right. Their dynamic shifted after that night. Jade continued to challenge Lila, but now it felt less like a provocation and more like an invitation. She coaxed Lila into helping with the menu revamp, encouraging her to share her ideas and trusting her instincts in the kitchen. Lila began to feel a sense of purpose she hadn't known was possible, a spark that grew brighter every time Jade praised her work. But it wasn't just their shared passion for cooking that deepened their connection. In quiet moments when the kitchen had emptied and the hum of the restaurant had faded, they talked. Jade shared stories of her life in New Orleans, her struggles to prove herself in a male-dominated industry, and the sacrifices she had made to pursue her dreams. Lila listened intently, her admiration for Jade growing with each story. In turn, Jade asked Lila questions no one else had ever dared to ask. "What do you want, Lila?" she asked one night as they cleaned up after a long shift. "Not what your parents want or what this town expects. What do you want?" Lila froze, her hands stilling over the stack of plates in front of her. I I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jade stepped closer, her voice gentle but insistent. "Then maybe it's time to figure it out." Their chemistry became impossible to ignore. Lila found herself looking forward to every interaction with Jade, her days brightened by the woman's sharp wit and easy laughter. But with each passing moment, the boundaries between them grew thinner, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Lila knew she was treading dangerous ground, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. Jade, for her part, was careful not to push too hard. She could see the conflict in Lila's eyes, the way she wrestled with her feelings. But Jade also saw the spark of something real, something worth fighting for. And despite the risks, she couldn't help but hope that Lila might eventually see it too. As the weeks went on, the line between what was expected and what they wanted blurred further, setting the stage for a collision neither of them could avoid. The restaurant was unusually quiet for a Friday night, the usual buzz of conversation and clinking dishes replaced by the soft hum of the kitchen appliances. Most of the staff had left for the evening, and the warm glow of the hanging lights cast long shadows across the empty dining room. In the kitchen, Lila and Jade stood side by side at the counter, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. They had been working together on a new dish, a fusion of Southern comfort food and bold Creole flavors that showcased both their talents. Lila chopped herbs with precise movements, her focus intent on the cutting board, while Jade stirred a simmering sauce, the wooden spoon moving in slow, deliberate circles. "You're good at this," Jade said, breaking the quiet. Her tone was casual, but her gaze lingered on Lila. Lila glanced up, her cheeks flushing under the attention. "It's just a hobby," she replied softly, returning her focus to the task at hand. Jade set down the spoon and turned to face her, leaning one hip against the counter. "You say that like it's nothing. But it's not. You're good, Lila. Better than good. So why are you hiding it?" Lila froze, her knife hovering over the cutting board. She didn't respond immediately, her mind racing. Jade's words struck a chord, touching a part of her she rarely allowed herself to examine. "I'm not hiding it," Lila said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's just, this isn't what my family expects of me." Jade tilted her head, her brows furrowing. "And what do you expect of yourself?" The question hung in the air, heavy and raw. Lila set down the knife and turned to Jade, her eyes shining with a mixture of frustration and vulnerability. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent my whole life doing what they expect, what they think is right. There's never been room for anything else." Jade took a step closer, her expression softening. "That's not fair to you," she said, her voice gentle. "You deserve to want something for yourself, to be something for yourself." Lila's breath hitched, her emotions threatening to spill over. "It's not that simple," she said, shaking her head. "You don't understand. My family, they've built everything on tradition, on expectations. If I step out of line, Her voice broke and she looked away, unable to finish the sentence. Jade reached out, her hand brushing against Lila's. The touch was light, hesitant, but it sent a jolt through Lila's entire body. Jade didn't pull away, her fingers curling around Lila's in a silent offer of comfort. "You don't have to carry that weight alone," Jade said softly. "You're allowed to want more." Lila turned back to her, her heart pounding in her chest. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them. Before she could second-guess herself, Lila leaned in, her lips brushing against Jade's in a kiss that was tentative but full of longing. The kiss deepened, and for the first time in her life, Lila felt truly free. Her hands moved to Jade's shoulders, and Jade responded by pulling her closer, their connection intensifying with each passing second. It was a moment of pure liberation, untainted by fear or expectation. The sound of a door slamming broke the spell, and they pulled apart abruptly, their breaths ragged. Lila's heart sank as she turned to see her brother Ethan standing in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and anger. "What the hell is this?" Ethan demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Lila's mouth went dry and she took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the counter to steady herself. "Ethan, don't," he snapped, cutting her off. His gaze shifted to Jade, his expression hardening. "You need to leave. Now." Jade opened her mouth to respond, but Lila stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Ethan, please let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," Ethan said, his tone cold. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our family? To you?" Lila felt tears prick at her eyes, but she held her ground. "I'm not ashamed of this," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'm not ashamed of how I feel." Ethan shook his head, his disappointment palpable. "You've brought shame to this family, Lila. Mom and Dad are going to hear about this, and when they do, you'd better be ready to face the consequences." With that, he stormed out, leaving Lila and Jade alone in the heavy silence. The fallout was swift and brutal. By the next morning, the news of what Ethan had witnessed had spread through the family and, inevitably, the town. Lila's parents confronted her in the restaurant's dining room, their expressions a mix of anger and heartbreak. "How could you do this to us?" her mother demanded, her voice shaking. "To this family? After everything we've done for you?" Lila's father was quieter but no less stern. "This isn't who you are, Lila," he said. "You need to end this now before it's too late." Lila looked between them, her heart aching. "I can't," she said quietly. "I won't." Her mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "You're choosing her over your own family?" "I'm choosing myself," Lila said, tears streaming down her face. "For once in my life, I'm choosing what makes me happy." The words hung in the air and her parents stared at her as if they didn't recognize her. Without another word, Lila turned and left the restaurant, her chest tight but her resolve unshaken. Jade found her later that day sitting on the steps of the town's old gazebo. She hesitated before approaching, unsure if her presence would be welcome. "Hey," Jade said softly, sitting down beside her. "I'm so sorry, Lila. This is my fault." Lila shook her head, wiping at her tears. "No, it's not. None of this is your fault." Jade reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "If you want me to leave, I will," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this easier for you." "I don't want you to leave," Lila said firmly, her voice breaking with emotion. "I don't want to lose you." "I can't." Jade looked at her, her own eyes glistening. "Then we'll figure this out together. No matter what." In that moment, Lila knew she had made the right choice. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time she felt like she was truly living, for herself and for the love she had found. The days that followed the confrontation with her family were some of the most excruciating of Lila's life. The air in her home was thick with tension, silence replacing the warm chatter that once filled the Morgan household. Her mother avoided her altogether, her eyes red and distant whenever they crossed paths. Her father's quiet disappointment weighed on her like a physical burden. Even her younger sister, who had always been her confidant, looked at her with a mixture of confusion and hurt, as if Lila had somehow shattered the foundation of their family's world. The ultimatum came one evening after dinner, delivered with cold precision by her father. He stood at the head of the table, his voice calm but firm as he laid out their expectations. "If you don't end this," he said, his hands resting heavily on the table, "you'll have no place in this family. No home, no stake in the restaurant. We've worked too hard to let everything fall apart because of your choices." Lila's heart sank. She had expected anger, even rejection, but the finality of his words struck her like a blow. "You're asking me to choose," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Between my family and being happy." Her father didn't flinch. "I'm asking you to do what's right. For this family, for this community. You know what that is." Jade, meanwhile, had been struggling with her own turmoil. She had hoped to make things easier for Lila, but instead her presence had turned Lila's world upside down. When Lila came to her that evening, her face pale and her hands shaking, Jade already knew what had happened. "They're threatening to take everything," Lila said, her voice breaking as she sank onto the couch in Jade's small apartment. "The restaurant, my home, everything I've ever known." Jade sat beside her, hesitant but needing to offer comfort. "Lila," she said gently, "maybe they're right." Lila looked up, startled. "What?" "I don't want you to lose everything because of me," Jade said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is your family, your history. I don't want to be the reason you lose it all." Tears spilled down Lila's cheeks. "Don't say that. Don't make this sound like it's your fault. It's not. It's them. They're the ones making me choose." "But you shouldn't have to choose," Jade said, her voice rising. "You deserve to have both. A family that loves you and a life that's yours. If they can't see that, then maybe She trailed off, swallowing hard. Maybe I should step back. No, Lila said sharply, her voice firm despite her tears. No, I don't want that. I don't want you to step back, and I don't want to go back to pretending. I don't know how to do this, Jade, but I can't lose you. Jade reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. You're stronger than you think, she said softly. But you have to decide what you want. Not for me, not for them, for you. The pressure from the town only made things worse. Word of the rift in the Morgan family spread quickly, and it wasn't long before the restaurant felt the impact. Long-time customers began canceling reservations, citing everything from scheduling conflicts to vague dissatisfaction. The dining room, once bustling with laughter and the clink of silverware, now felt eerily quiet, the empty tables a glaring reminder of the town's judgment. Some younger patrons, including a few of Lila's former classmates, voiced their support. They left notes of encouragement on receipts and whispered words of solidarity when no one else was listening. But the whispers of support were drowned out by the louder voices of disapproval, the stares and murmurs that followed Lila wherever she went. She began to feel the walls closing in, the weight of it all pressing down on her until she could barely breathe. One evening, after an especially tense confrontation with her parents, Lila fled to the river on the outskirts of town. It was a place she hadn't visited in years, a quiet spot where she used to go as a child to think. The water was still, reflecting the soft glow of the moon, and the air was cool against her tear-streaked face. She sat on the bank, hugging her knees to her chest as the sound of crickets filled the silence. She didn't hear Jade approach until she felt her presence beside her, the warmth of her body a comfort against the chill of the night. I figured I'd find you here, Jade said softly, sitting down beside her. Lila wiped at her eyes, embarrassed. I just needed to get away. Jade nodded, her gaze fixed on the water. I get it. Sometimes the only way to breathe is to step away from the noise. They sat in silence for a moment before Lila spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do, Jade. I feel like I'm being torn in half. Jade turned to her, her expression serious. Can I tell you something? Lila nodded. When I came out to my family, Jade began, her voice steady but laced with emotion, they didn't take it well. My mom cried, my dad barely looked at me, and my brother, he told me I was a disgrace. I thought I'd lost them forever. It was the hardest thing I've ever been through. Lila looked at her, her heart aching for the pain in Jade's voice. Did they ever come around? Jade shook her head. Not really. My mom tries, but it's not the same. And my dad, she sighed. I don't think he ever will. But you know what? I don't regret it. Because for the first time in my life I was honest about who I was. I stopped hiding, stopped pretending. It hurt like hell, but it was worth it. Lila's breath hitched, tears spilling over again. I'm scared, Jade. I'm scared of losing everything. I know, Jade said gently, reaching for her hand. But you won't lose everything. You'll still have yourself. And you'll have me. If you want me. Lila turned to her, her tears mixing with a tentative smile. I do. I just don't know how to be that brave. You already are, Jade said, her voice filled with quiet conviction. You just don't see it yet. As they sat together by the river, Lila felt a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that she wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to face what lay ahead. The Morgan family's annual harvest celebration was the social event of the season in Millhaven. Held in the sprawling backyard of the Morgan home, the party brought together neighbors, business partners, and the town's most influential figures. The tables were adorned with fall-themed decorations, the air rich with the scent of roasted pecans and pumpkin spice. Lila had attended the event every year of her life, her presence as much a part of the tradition as the bonfire that closed the evening. This year, however, she felt like a stranger in her own family. Her parents had made it clear that tonight was about appearances. They had warned her repeatedly in the days leading up to the celebration. No public displays, no signs of rebellion, no Jade. Her father's words rang in her ears. We need to show the town that we're still united, still the Morgans they've always known. But Jade was there. Lila had insisted on inviting her, and though her parents had begrudgingly allowed it, Jade's presence was treated as an open secret, acknowledged by no one but noticed by everyone. She stood at the edge of the crowd, a quiet observer in a sleek black dress, her posture relaxed but her eyes constantly searching for Lila. The tension was palpable, an invisible thread connecting them even across the distance. As the evening wore on, Lila moved through the party with a forced smile, exchanging polite words with guests who either pretended not to know or whispered behind her back the moment she walked away. Her heart raced every time she caught sight of Jade, who remained on the fringes, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Her parents, ever the hosts, kept a watchful eye on her. When her father called for everyone's attention near the end of the evening, Lila's stomach churned. He stood on the small stage set up for announcements, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his tone warm but formal. "This celebration is about more than the harvest. It's about family, tradition, and the values that bind us together." The applause that followed was polite but subdued. Lila's father turned his gaze toward her, his next words clearly rehearsed. "My daughter Lila has always embodied those values, and I know she'll continue to make us proud." The crowd turned toward her, expectant smiles on their faces. Her father extended his hand, silently inviting her to join him on the stage. Every muscle in Lila's body tensed. This was the moment she had dreaded, the moment where she was supposed to play her part, to confirm to everyone that she was the daughter they believed her to be. Instead, she felt herself moving toward Jade. The murmurs started immediately, the crowd parting as Lila crossed the yard toward the edge where Jade stood. The world seemed to blur around her, the noise fading until all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. When she reached Jade, she paused, her hands trembling. "Come with me," she said softly. Jade hesitated, her eyes searching Lila's face for reassurance. Then with a nod she followed. Lila led her to the center of the gathering, the eyes of the crowd now fixed on them. Her father's face was pale with anger, her mother's hand clutching at her chest as though bracing for impact. Lila's voice trembled as she began to speak, but the strength in her words grew with each passing moment. "I know this isn't what you expected," she said, her gaze moving between her parents and the assembled guests. "And I know this isn't what you want. But I can't keep living my life for everyone else. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not." Her eyes found Jade and she reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt both terrifying and liberating. "I love Jade," she said, her voice breaking but resolute. "And I won't apologize for that. I won't hide it." The silence that followed was deafening, the crowd frozen in shock. Then, as if a dam had broken, the reactions came in waves. Some gasped audibly, their faces a mixture of disbelief and disapproval. Others whispered furiously to one another, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. But amid the chaos, a single voice broke through, a slow clap that grew into a round of applause. It was one of Lila's old classmates, a young woman who had always been vocal about change and acceptance. Others hesitated, then joined in, their support quiet but meaningful. Her father's voice cut through the applause, cold and sharp. "Enough." He stepped forward, his expression hardened. "You've made your choice, Lila. And you've made it clear where your loyalties lie." Her mother's voice was softer but no less painful. "We raised you to honor this family," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "And this is how you repay us?" Lila's voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "I'm not trying to hurt you. But I can't be someone I'm not even for you." Her father shook his head, his voice final. "Then you're no longer welcome here." The words hit like a blow, but Lila stood her ground. Jade placed a steadying hand on her back, her presence a silent source of strength. Together they walked away from the stunned crowd, leaving behind the life Lila had always known. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change. Lila and Jade relocated to a nearby town, pooling their savings and skills to open a small bistro in a bustling neighborhood. The space was modest but warm, the walls adorned with local art and the tables filled with the sense of their combined culinary talents. They named it Second Chances, a nod to the journey that had brought them there. The bistro quickly gained a loyal following, customers drawn not only to the food but to the story behind it. Friends from Millhaven began to visit, offering quiet words of support and apologies for not standing by Lila sooner. Even some of the younger members of her family made the trip, their curiosity outweighing the disapproval of their elders. One evening, as the bistro buzzed with the laughter and conversation of satisfied patrons, Lila and Jade stood behind the counter, watching the scene unfold. Lila leaned into Jade's side, a soft smile playing on her lips. "This feels right," Lila said, her voice filled with quiet contentment. Like this is where we're supposed to be. Jade pressed a kiss to her temple, her own smile mirroring Lila's. We made it, she said simply. In that moment, the scars of the past didn't disappear, but they felt smaller, less significant. What mattered was the life they had built together. A life defined not by fear or expectation but by love and authenticity.